More detail on sound absorption. So when we focus on sound absorption, there are three mechanisms of sound absorption that occur. There's porous dissipative absorption, when sound enters a porous material and frictional interaction with the material converts sound to heat. And this is the mechanism for most soft, fibrous materials. It is happening at very low levels, so you can't warm your hands off that surface, but the sound is actually being converted to heat by interaction through the pores of the material. The second mechanism is when sound induces vibrational movements of panels or flexing movements. And this is common to achieve low frequency absorption in spaces. This can be achieved through plasterboard walls when the stud spacing is far enough apart that you can actually induce movement in the panels or feel vibration within the panels within a space. The last mechanism is the Helmholtz resonator absorption effect, where resonances in cavities are excited by sound and energy is dissipated by oscillation of air in the neck of the cavity. Helmholtz resonators are used in industrial applications, in particular in chimney stacks or in industrial facilities where low frequency noise is emitted through chimneys. By tuning a Helmholtz resonator to the problem frequency, they can be very effective in absorbing sound. Let's look at the characteristics of these three different absorber types. First of all, let's define what the sound absorption coefficient is. The sound absorption coefficient is defined as the ratio of absorbed energy to the total incident energy on a surface. For example, 30% absorption of sound results in an absorption coefficient of 0.3. So the range of sound absorption of materials is at 0 to 1. So looking at the three absorber types here, for a porous absorber, such as mineral wool or polyester or a curtain, you can see at the lower frequencies, the sound absorption is not great, but as the frequency increases or the wavelength gets smaller, porous absorbers become a lot more effective at absorbing sound. Panel absorbers, on the other hand, are very effective at low frequencies. Sound is inducing a flexing movement in panels, such as plasterboard walls, that are able to take sound out of a room at very low frequencies. And lastly, there's the Helmholtz resonator type of absorption, which is tuned to a very specific sound frequency according to the cavity size, the volume of the cavity, and the neck size of the Helmholtz resonator. So these can be tuned to problematic frequencies of sound and absorb that sound. More sound absorber examples. For porous absorbers, examples include carpet, drapes, mineral fibre ceiling tiles, mineral wool, and people. So the design of concert halls takes into account the audience, whether the audience chamber is completely full or whether it is only partially full. So the design of the seating within performance spaces is very important. The sound absorption coefficients of the seats are designed so there is minimal difference between the sound absorptive properties when they're occupied and when they're unoccupied, because we do not want the sound quality of the performance space to change according to how many people are in the audience. Examples of panel absorbers. I've talked about plasterboard sheets in rooms. Also glass, window glass is very important. So the larger the pane of glass or the larger the window in a building, the lower the frequency of absorption of that piece of glass. Suspended ceilings also provide low frequency absorption, and timber floors. So timber floor design in recital halls and other performance spaces is also a very critical design element, because underneath timber floors, there's usually a large air void that's used as a storage area for instruments and seating. So a timber floor, which is a thin membrane coupled with a large volume of air behind, could give rise to a low frequency absorption characteristic. Helmholtz resonators, I've talked about side branch cavities in chimney stacks. They are also used in air conditioning ducts to reduce the tonal effects of fan noise within air conditioning systems. Open bottles are also considered to be Helmholtz resonators as well. And in traditional amphitheatre design, in Greek amphitheatres, pots with different levels of water were scattered around the amphitheatre to provide different effects of reverberation in the amphitheatre space. They were able to tune the reverberance or outdoor acoustic environment by using pots of different volumes filled with different heights of water. Here's the sound absorption coefficients of some common materials. So remember, the sound absorption coefficient can vary from 0 to 1. So let's look at the first one there, thick carpet on foam underlay. As you might imagine, at lower frequencies, the sound absorption coefficient is quite poor due to the carpet thickness being small in comparison to the wavelength of sound that it is trying to absorb. So at 125 Hertz, it only gives an absorption coefficient of 0.08. But as we move up the frequency range, the sound absorption coefficient is much higher and it absorbs a lot more sound. So let's move on to concrete or terrazzo tile, which is a hard sound reflective surface. As you might imagine, the sound absorption coefficient is very low across the entire frequency range. Next are medium velour drapes, which, as well as being a sound absorptive material, the spacing of the drapes off the wall in performance spaces and other spaces in which drapes are used provides added low frequency absorption. So you can see we're getting quite good sound absorption at the mid frequencies, 250 Hertz to 500 Hertz, but also very effective sound absorption at those higher frequencies, 1 kilohertz to 2 kilohertz. So by spacing the drape off the wall, as well as getting the high frequency porous absorption from the drape, we're getting added low frequency benefit by coupling with an airspace behind. Glass windows. As I mentioned, glass windows can give effective low frequency absorption through flexural movements. So as you can see here at 125 Hertz and 250 Hertz, we're getting sound absorption through flexing of that window or movement of that window. As you might expect, because the window material itself is hard and reflective, we don't get much sound absorption at the higher frequencies. Moving on to mineral wool, 25 millimeters thick. Again, there's not much sound absorption at the lower frequencies, but at the much higher frequencies, where the sound wavelengths are at the same order of magnitude as the material thickness, we're getting very effective sound absorption. And then a wood stage with the void beneath, which I mentioned before. In this case, it's a wood floor. It's getting very little sound absorption at the lower frequencies because it's a hard reflective material. Then at the mid frequencies here, and mid-higher frequencies, we're getting some sound absorption. Another hard reflective surface finish you might not have thought about is the surface of a swimming pool or still water. It is almost the same as concrete acoustically. We get very little sound absorption across the entire frequency range. And for this reason, you might hear sound propagate over large areas of water quite effectively. At large distances away from a sound source, you might hear music that's being played on the harbour or being played at a location with a large body of water in between, because sound is skimming at grazing incidence across a hard sound reflective surface, which is the water. If we consider plaster on a brick wall, we've got a slightly more porous material that's been layered on over a brick wall. So we're getting slightly more sound absorption at the mid to high frequencies from that plaster coating than we would over a hard reflective surface finish, which would be the bare brick wall.